So welcome everybody. This is an event put on by 2015 Visioneers with our collaborator Simulations Plus. Today's topic or title is AI and Adaptive Learning, a new era in clinical trial optimization, protocol compliance, and risk-based monitoring. And our speaker will be Brad Stefanovic, and I'll introduce him shortly. So today's agenda, we'll just go over rules of engagement, industry perspective from us, very two-slider, and then Brad will give his talk, and then we'll have time for Q&A. So as always, put your questions in the chat or the Q&A box, either or. The Q&A box will be anonymous to the rest of the audience. The chat box will people see who asked that question. We will address all questions. If for some reason we don't get to your question, it will get answered and we'll post the answer to that question. And then, like I mentioned, this will go on demand. It is being recorded. So if for some reason you have to leave early, get your questions in, and then you can come back and watch the recording. So brief industry perspective from 2015 Visioneers. Just like the current status of where things are at, lots of data silos in the clinical space. You've got multiple systems today with EHRs, EMRs, the lab, imaging, omics data. Omics data is exploding. It's part of the uncovering of new discoveries, insights, and then slowing down trial design and decision making when these things aren't connected and working properly. Trial duration, phase 2 to 3 takes about 7 years. 40 to 60% of that time spent waiting for patient events. It's expensive as all get out, and part of the reason is you have to throw a lot of people at this to make it work and get it over the finish line. Recruitment bottlenecks, a lot of failure due to enrollment problems, poor timelines, stalling, ends up stalling innovation. 80%, that's a big number from recruitment problems. Low success rates, less than 12% of drugs entering clinical trials receive an FDA nod or approval. Static protocols, results, slower innovation, higher cost of failure, inequitable access to care. Industry readiness, converging forces driving AI and adaptive learning. And you're going to hear Brad talk a lot about this. But so digitization of clinical operations, explosion of real world data, having access to longitudinal patient data allows door opening for predictive modeling. Again, you'll see more of this. The maturity of machine learning and AI is exponentially growing. The FDA has made a lot of announcements, and they just made an announcement yesterday, which was pretty exciting, where they're going to start more in silico work and allow more in silico work. So it's optimum time for what we're talking about. There's a lot of pressure to get these things across the finish line and have better, more data, more in silico first approaches to inform decisions. Cross-sector collaboration, big tech, CROs, large pharmas, medium pharmas, small pharmas, all coming together, working together and getting things done. So it's catching up. And if you're not on the curve of AI and adaptive learning, you're going to be left behind and you're going to suffer, and you're probably going to be one of these statistics that we talked about. So the more you're on top of this, the better off you're going to be. So Brad is the VP and head of clinical operations at Pro-ficiency, a Simulations Plus organization. He has over 17 years of experience in clinical trial management, clinical technology, vendor oversight, and strategy. His career spans consulting, academia, nonprofits, industry, and including leading global clinical programs for major medical companies. Known for his strong scientific communication and leadership, Brad has successfully guided large teams across the medical product lifecycle. Originally from Australia, he moved to the US a decade ago and was named Alumni of the Year in 2022 by the University of the Sunshine Coast for his innovation and leadership in biotechnology. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Brad. Dr. Brad.
Just Brad's fine. Thanks, John. And
You're welcome.
firstly, I'd like to let everyone know that this is me. I know I've got a beard compared to that photo. That's grown a bit of time over the past couple of years. So please know that it is me. And it's quite apt considering the talks we'll probably have here about avatars and scenarios. It's a real me. That's from a couple of years back. So allow me to share my screen. And of course, share the sound.
Thanks, Brad.
So firstly, I like to do an intro, particularly given we're a content generation part of the organization. I like to lead with some initial content. So please watch this and then we'll get into it.
Welcome to the Pro-ficiency Demo. In these trainings, learners apply their knowledge of the study as they make critical decisions related to evaluating and managing participants in our virtual simulated study environment. By simulating some of the situations site staff may encounter, our goal is to help you prevent potential protocol deviations that could occur during the study. We can support all therapeutic areas in over 100 languages. Here are a few examples. Please select the therapeutic area you want to explore.
That's something that we'll get into. So I want to say firstly sorry. It's not letting me do that. Hang on. That's my fault. Let me go back to here. Beautiful. So firstly, I want to say thank you to everyone for joining. As I said before, Brad Stefanovic. So I'm the VP and Head of Clinical Innovation here at Simulations Plus. Pro-ficiency was acquired by Simulations Plus in June of last year. We're very excited to be a great solution provider within the organization. And what I'm going to be talking about today is AI and adaptive learning, a new era in clinical trial optimization, protocol compliance, and risk-based monitoring. So one of the first things I'd like to lead off with actually is a quote by Ben Franklin. Okay, so tell me and I forget, teach me and I may remember, involve me and I learn. Okay, and this is one of the sort of key aspects of training, particularly in our industry, given my near 20 years now in the industry, that I feel like we've been missing the point. Okay, we're a hands-on immersive industry, and yet a lot of what we do from a training and learning perspective doesn't reflect that. And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. So the problem, okay, so we're very aware that as we're coming up with new therapies, challenging more and more complex indications and disease states, we're having increased clinical trial complexity. And what comes with that complexity is challenges with competency and the standardization of that complexity for global studies, okay? And also the current demand for DE&I recognition across all study operations. It's a big scientific problem. We need to make sure that our studies are appropriately representative, not just in design and implementation, but how we train, how we engage and get people involved as part of participation in those programs, both from a patient and a site and study and staffing perspective. One of the things I really want to touch on, it sort of sets the importance up for how important it is, firstly, to train appropriately, but then learn how best to train. What's the best practices for that training? And that's this graph here. And this is the top 10 FDA citations for pretty much the past 15 years, okay? I like to think we're a very smart industry, very intelligent people are involved in it usually. We've got physicians, nurses, pharmacists, scientists, all sorts of great and wonderful intelligent people that know what they're doing and really want to help their patients. But yet the number one finding in FDA citations is protocol compliance issues. That's that 41% chunk there. So if we know what we're doing in medicine, if we know what we're doing in our standard of care approach, what is different in clinical research? And we have to start thinking, oh, okay, why is this errors happening when we generally know what we're doing in a day-to-day operations? Well, that's where we come to the forefront of understanding what's different in our clinical programs and how do we better train these people to execute what we need from a clinical research program. The problem is how we do it currently, or as I'm saying here yesterday, is it is not an engaging format from a training and learning perspective. Traditional didactic methods, they're time intensive with no actionable outcomes. For those that have been at typical training scenarios like investigator meetings or have had their SIVs with a site monitor and all that, you're being sort of hot gospel to a 300-page slide deck where there's many parts of that potentially are quite redundant training. So it's not respectful of the site's time, it's not engaging, and also after completion, you have no actionable outcomes of the learners that have taken that training. It's a checkbox item, and that's something that we need to get away from. Live presentations sometimes are not considerate of attendee competency, okay? You're sitting in a room, you're looking at slides, you could be looking at your phone or whatever, anything like that. We're not engaging and keeping people at the forefront of what are the key elements you need to execute for your programs. And the content is generated by non-learning specialists, it's low engagement, there's no instructional design consideration, and that's heavily important to keep everyone engaged and progressing forward with how to implement the key outcomes of your clinical strategy. And that's where we sort of lead to now what would be today or tomorrow's solution, okay? And that's where sort of the adaptive learning approach comes in that leverages AI to achieve content velocity, okay? And that's speed to market. It's not just about utilizing AI or other means to generate the content. It's important that content drafting process happens much more quickly. And that's where we can leverage AI. And we'll talk a bit about that today. Where we also like to leverage it is improving cultural competency, so relevance to market. And I'm going to show some examples of that as well. And then enduring scalability, so standardization for the market, okay? So no matter what markets you're looking to utilize for your clinical programs, whether it's the Americas, Latin America, Asia Pacific, or Europe, that the training and the content that you're producing is scalable for those particular learners and audiences that you're targeting for your work. And so that's where within Stimulations Plus, we're adopting and adapting to AI. And it's a big thing across all of industry. AI adoption is accelerating. 65% of organizations are regularly using generative AI in at least one business function. And that's nearly doubling from the previous year. And that's a stat from McKinsey in 2024. And why does that matter? This surge highlights how businesses are leveraging AI. And it's not just a novel tool, like about 2 years ago when people were first talking about it. When used appropriately, and I've got to harp on that, when it's used appropriately, it can be a critical driver for efficiency and innovation and giving you that competitive advantage, particularly when you have a very well thought out plan about how you're going to leverage AI as a tool. Everyone can use AI. It's about how you're appropriately strategically aligning it with your business goals. And in our case, how we're aligning it to accelerate content velocity, improve cultural competency, and absolutely improve the adaptive learning approach in clinical research. So how is AI driving innovation and content generation? Well, the key item I just touched on was content velocity. At a minimum, we're looking at a 30% faster creation of content within the Pro-ficiency platform. It can be personalized, dynamic, and interactive and immersive content, okay? So you've got sort of a level of enhanced creativity and cultural adaptability. The enhanced creativity comes with the fact that if you're utilizing AI as a tool, you may have ideas and it may suggest certain things that you haven't thought of, which is a great asset to have. And it's adaptive with the level of competency. And that's where being respectful of the time that it takes to training is important, particularly for those that are highly competent in the area that you're working them through. And that's where the more you know, the faster you go through content. If you're at a lower level of competency, you're going to receive more corrective intervention to get you to the desired level of competency. And we'll show examples of that later. Data-driven insights. So we're going to look at identifying trends in content consumption and competency proactively. And, negative trends or unexpected risks that are identified so that we can therefore mitigate any potential errors that you're seeing in the learning behaviors of your target audiences before it presents in the real data. So let's be proactive about mitigating risk, assessing where there's key areas where there's potential protocol deviations happening with your sites before that actually affects the real clinical data. and making sure then you're ensuring the patients are proceeding as safely as possible according to the protocol. The sites are confident that they're not going to be making errors and are confident in executing the instructions for that clinical program. And then also AI is driving innovation in, video, audio, translation, accessibility options. Not only improving cultural competency, but with high velocity. So it's not a hold up to the overall production process for your training. In saying that, AI does have its shortcomings, and particularly when it's utilized in, say, an open source format. That's where the varied accuracy and reliability and quality consistency issues can come to the fore. You may have heard over the past bit of time a term that's sort of becoming the stock word for errors or misleading issues with AI being hallucinations and things like that. So that's the type of thing that you've got to think about as part of choosing the type of platform you're going to utilize for this work. Also making sure that you're on top of any ethical concerns, plagiarism and copyright issues. So unauthorized use of name, image, and likeness, that's a key thing we got to worry about. Lack of emotional intelligence. Now, whilst that type of thing is improving from a content generation perspective, we want to make sure that cognitive dissonance, particularly for the learners that are engaging with your content, isn't a key factor as part of their use of your platform. And then cost and accessibility. So it's hard to commence work utilizing AI, particularly for content generation, from a sort of scratch perspective when you don't really necessarily have a custom platform for hosting that content like you would with the Pro-ficiency platform. So how have we adapted to AI? So firstly, the best scenario to start this with is about how we first utilize the adaptive learning approach within the Pro-ficiency platform. So Pro-ficiency's adaptive learning methodology, we utilize interactive simulations for drastically improved competency, okay? We provide real-world scenarios that allow the learner to practice in a risk-free environment. The best way to think about it is if Mark Cuban from Shark Tank was with me right now and I'm in the elevator with him and he goes, Brad, give me your elevator pitch for this platform, I would be telling him it's a flight simulator for clinical research, where we're providing real-world scenarios for you to practice in and navigate, like a pilot goes into their pod and navigates, to get around turbulence as part of their flying. So then when they're doing that in real life, they can get you home safely or to your destination with no risk or issue. That's how we sort of operate in the Pro-ficiency realm. Targeted in-module coaching that's tailored to individual learning need. And that's what helps me describe the adaptive learning processes with these diagrams here on the right. So on the far right, we're mostly familiar with this scenario, particularly if you've done GCP training or anything like that. It's a knowledge check scenario where you presented a question or something and you're given a multiple choice answer. And that has its place in the world. But what's happening from that is that's a typical training approach where you may be making a correct decision or an incorrect decision. It's about if you've made an incorrect decision, all right, why did I get that wrong? What can be done to help remediate that? And that's the type of information we don't get from typical training modes. Here is where that starts to happen in this middle diagram here, which is sort of scenario and coaching. And that's the main foray we focus on within Pro-ficiency and then leading into a full-blown simulation that you see here in the diagram on the left. Coaching is that scene is presented, a key decision that you need to make in a protocol, such as a patient is about to be enrolled. They've got one blood biomarker that's out of place that may not necessarily have them fit. What do you do? Do you say, oh, they can be enrolled anyway? And that may be the incorrect answer. You are then told specifically to that incorrect decision that you've made why it's wrong, and then facilitates you to then make the right decision. So it's mitigating the risk whilst you're undertaking that simulation. So that if your level of competency is down here, but the target level of competency to execute the program is up here, it helps lead you to make that right decision. And on the back end, the learning journey, which is covered by metrics and analytics, which I'll show examples of later, facilitates understanding for the sponsor or whoever's running these programs to understand, okay, we've achieved competency for this person, but these were the risk elements that facilitated that maybe we need to mitigate before they see real patients. This adaptability, it reduces training time and personalizes the in-moment remediation. And then if this is utilized on the patient-facing education side, it allows patients to explore the interest area in an engaging environment, particularly if we're utilizing it for study summary work or as a supplement for the consenting process. And simulation-based learning is very much scientifically proven to be effective. The great thing about all this is that we develop the content which saves you time. And that's obviously key, particularly in clinical operations. So right here is our first sort of example. And this is an example of generating content in our studio, which is more our traditional sort of way of generating content, where we have a patient that's coming in to the clinic and they're taking a pill once daily as part of their participation in this trial. They come in to talk about something, and then after they've presented this situation, we're going to have some decisions that we have to determine are the best course of action as per the protocol for this patient. And this patient is named Scott, so I'm going to say hello to him right now. Hi, Scott.
Hi, doctor. Well, you know that medicine I've been taking, I think I'm getting some side effects. I'd like to reduce the dosage. You think that'd be all right?
So given my experience in industry, I know without even reading this protocol that just changing the dose may not be the appropriate option. There's other options here that we may have to ask about symptoms or no adjustment.
That is incorrect. According to the dosing section of the protocol, dose adjustments are only permissible up to week 4 unless there are special circumstances.
So as you can see, that's sort of where the power of this platform comes into play and the power of the adaptive learning approach comes in. It's not just a simple knowledge check where you tick the box and you're told it's right or wrong and then move on to the next one. It's remediated in that situation where we've made the wrong decision, we're told why, to facilitate then making the right decision for that particular part. So you're leaving with a desired level of competency, no matter where you started from a level of competency beforehand. That's the adaptive learning approach in play.
Hi.
Once that decision is made, it's like, okay, that's fantastic. We've remediated the risk, but how do we make sure that risk is remediated long-term and across the board for the whole studies? This is where the metrics and analytics come in for the Pro-ficiency platform, and for you as the team that's managing the study, or whether it's CRO or however you choose to manage this program, is important to identify and mitigate risk. So what you see here is a graph where on the y-axis is each decision that's for a typical protocol. Similar to the dosing scenario we just saw for Scott, would represent one column for that. Anything in the blue represents the decision percentage of people that made the decision correctly first time. Anything in that sort of orange amber color is the percentage of people that made an incorrect decision once, received some light mentoring to correct that mistake, and then they've then made the right decision. Anything in the red represents anyone that's made the incorrect decision more than once. And that's then what we feel is heavy mentoring was required to then get them to the desired level of competency. And where this is great to then be utilized is, where do the sites exhibit competency? Where are they exhibiting their strengths? So you know you don't have to harp on them that much for those items. Otherwise, it starts becoming redundant training. They know what they're doing in those aspects. Leave them alone there. But where do they need that corrective intervention to occur? All right, so you're formalizing and personalizing it based on the sites or the individual's experiences in the program to fix risk, particularly related to their role or instructions of what they've got to do for your program. And what do we remediate with the sites overall? And this is some of the metrics I'll show examples of a bit further down about how we can break that out role-based, site-based as well. And how do these analytics inform our risk-based monitoring strategy? And that's heavily important, particularly if you're doing this proactively before you're initiating sites, how you best assign your CRA resources. How do you best facilitate the monitoring frequency? How in-depth do SIVs be to mitigate the risk? That's the type of questions that you're going to be able to start answering as part of this approach. And then what it ends up doing is, particularly if you're doing this in the lead up to investigator meetings or SIVs, is those meetings become discussion-based remediation opportunities, okay? Rather than the investigator meeting being that 4-hour scenario with no bathroom breaks or anything like that, and you're going through that 300-page slide deck. In the lead up to the meeting, you can present the confidence scores for those decision points and say to everyone in attendance, hey, everyone's got terrific scoring. Everyone understands and shown great competency in these areas up the top here. But for this investigator meeting, we're going to focus on these bottom 4 items as part of remediating the responses that were received as part of this approach. What then that does is, firstly, it would condense the duration of that part of the investigator meeting. It's an engaged focus item because the sites and the PIs and everyone involved in that investigator meeting is enamored with the fact that we can fix our errors. We've identified what we don't know. We can get on top of these as part of this meeting. You're getting a greater engaged audience as part of that approach. And therefore, you're also reducing the need for that in-person time. Or subsequently, you can leverage an investigator meeting for shorter training times, focusing on these areas, and use that spare time to do what is best for relationship building, building the rapport with the sites, getting them involved, understanding the key concerns from their end, and facilitating that discussion. And then you're also actually driving sustainability goals, particularly for global programs. Yeah, there's less travel, less hotels, and gradually for larger studies, this becomes a net negative cost when utilizing things like the Pro-ficiency platform in reducing either the size or number, or even the presence of on-site investigator meetings. And then also overall, when you're reducing time and making things more efficient, or reducing site burden, one of the key things and pillars that actually Pro-ficiency is involved with the SERS organization to reduce 25 by 25, which is reduce training load at a minimum by 25% by the end of this year for our clinical sites. So metric-driven risk-based monitoring, and this is one of the key aspects that we utilize for understanding the learning journey for our sites. Now, one thing I want to focus on here is how these sites differ quite significantly in how they've learned their journey. Site number 1 here, as you can see, they've got their decisions that are on this x-axis across, where a tick represents, yes, they got a correct decision straight away. Anything with like a yellow caution sign means they made a mistake once, wrong decision, but corrected it pretty quickly, and that low risk sort of element is there. Anything with a big red cross means, okay, they've missed the mark more than once for that particular decision point. The great thing about it is, again, they don't leave that decision point until they make a correct answer. So they're leaving with that demonstrated level of competency that's desired for the program. But on the back end, you as the sponsor, you as the CRO, or someone that manages the clinical site that can have access to this, knows what you may need to keep an eye on or risk remediate thereafter. So from a monitoring perspective, site number 1 may not necessarily need an in-person SIV. It could be done remotely. There's not really any items here that needs to be remediated. They're a good site. You don't want to take up their time. You want them to screen and enroll your patients. And maybe the monitoring frequency for that site will be reduced, which is great for overall budgeting and strategy, because you can leverage the monitoring frequency that's lower here to increase the monitoring frequency that's happening at site number 2. You may assign your most senior CRA to this site to make sure that they've got the best hands possible to lead them through mitigation of the risk for their particular program. You may ensure that their in-person SIV clearly focus on remediating a lot of these risks because they're clearly identified as part of this. You may leverage the sub-I here, who seems to have done very well at this site, to be a champion for your program and to help improve the standards of everyone else at this site. And then on top of that, the monitoring frequency increase that site 2 would have is not actually adding to your budget, because all you're doing is reassigning visits that would have happened at site 1 that now don't need to. They can go to site 2. Site number 3 here has generally done pretty well, but the problem here is that your clinical research coordinator has not done very well. Again, they don't leave the program until they've shown competency for the desired outcomes, but their journey to get there shows an element of risk with their participation in the program. And that's where, again, it may be a news coordinator that started the program. We need to make sure that they actually one, with what's happening with the protocol. They are monitored closely by the CRA, or maybe you're leveraging the PI to be more involved as part of that management of the program. As you see, the PI's done well, maybe their experience, and just a fresh coordinator. But these metrics, what they're doing is they're allowing you to ask the questions. What can we break down from these themes? Is there anything across the board at these sites that we need to improve? And that's something where maybe across the sites, we see a theme here for dosing. What do we need to do then to leverage that? Maybe at an investigator meeting, or in future before sites are initiated. Maybe it's a newsletter. Maybe there's something that we need to facilitate to get people on board to the desired level of competency to execute the program well. So that's the predominant basis of how adaptive learning and insights very much helps the risk-based monitoring approach through content. But then we also want to make sure that we're doing this as quickly as possible and it's scalable for future global programs. And that's where then we look to very much incorporate AI into content development. Now, as I touched on a little earlier, we need to generate content rapidly to leverage AI to the best of its ability. We can leverage AI to facilitate DE&I facilitation and then global content comprehension. Okay, now they're key watchwords for us because rapid content generation will then facilitate not only a quicker start for your best sites, but onboarding for even the sites that are more trailing towards the end, more naivety sites. If you're getting them involved into this program much earlier in the piece, again, you're able to get on top of the risk elements that are identified as part of this program much earlier on in their initiation process. Get on top of those risks, confirm their potential eligibility to continue in the program. And if you're confident that you can facilitate them to be initiated, they're able to start sooner and be more engaged, more confident in your program. And from the sponsor side or the CRO side, for that particular site, because you're helping them get confident with execution of the program, you will start to become the sponsor or CRO of choice for your programs with those sites, which, as we know, can be quite competitive. So one of the first aspects I would like to show as part of sort of the leveraging of AI is how we've done it for some not generic instruction, but more so items that can be a bit more templated approach, where it's quick, it's updatable, it's scalable, and can be templated for future editions from other studies, but from a templated approach, like an e-diary. Now, most e-diaries, particularly if you're using them for a full program of studies within a portfolio of a product, the use of the e-diary is generally going to be the same across. So you can leverage AI to not only create something once, but then be leveraged across multiple programs with slight edits thereafter for protocol specificities. And I'm going to hit play on this, and I just want you to sort of, watch sort of how this flows, and I'll then elaborate further on where AI is in this particular video.
Welcome to this short training on using the e-diary for this clinical trial. A big part of this study is recording your experiences each day. This is done via the study e-diary. Detailed instructions on how to download, activate, and use the diary can be found in the guide provided by the study site staff. The study staff are also available to assist with downloading the diary. Please be sure to record all symptoms you experienced. If you do not have a panic attack during the day, you'll need to record this in the diary. If you do have one or more panic attacks during the day, you'll need to record each one separately, along with the symptoms you experienced. So whether you do or don't have a panic attack, it is important that you make an entry in the diary every single day.
Please select where you'd like to go next.
So one of the key aspects I like to highlight as part of that approach is the AI and use of avatar work for that scene. For those that didn't know, our lady narrator in that scene is actually an avatar. Now, that avatar is not like a generic avatar that you now see on the screen before you here. She was actually an avatar that is a live shot person in the studio that we then leverage as an avatar. So we can make avatars of real life people. In fact, there's a Bradatar that we leverage as well. And as part of that approach, you're able to utilize that scenario for many different scenes very quickly. And that's part of the content generation scenario that's important for the velocity of getting that done sooner and being able to review more quickly. So you can remediate any particular errors in the content you're trying to produce, get on top of it quickly and pushed out without a sacrifice in quality, which is fantastic.
Welcome to
The next scenario that I wanted to show as part of this is how we leverage AI for scalable translation services. We're in a global industry. There's many different languages spoken, but we need to make sure that the training not only is done well and shot well and the content's engaging in English, that we leverage it for other languages and it's done quickly and also done accurately. And this is where we leverage both our live shooting scenario and then leveraging our avatar technology to overlay on live shoots. Okay, so this scene here on the left is a pharmacist and a patient having an interaction about the use of a continuous glucose monitor. This was shot in our studio in Raleigh, North Carolina, and it's just a short little scene just to give you a snippet of some background about the use of this continuous glucose monitor.
I'd also like to find a time to review the information you are receiving from your CGM with you. Does that sound okay?
I'd really appreciate that. I think a CGM will help keep me better track of my health. Thanks so much for your help.
And then we leverage this, as I said, to overshoot this live scene. I want you to keep an ear out for the speaking of this scene, and also keep an eye on the faces and the mouth of the participants, of the actors, sorry, I should say, in this scene. It's an exact replica.
Me gustaría planear un momento para revisar juntos la información que recibes de ahí. ¿Te va bien?
Agradezco mucho. Un CGM mejorará mi seguimiento de salud. Gracias por la ayuda.
So as you can see, it's the exact same scene, but with our avatar overlay technology, we're able to leverage the Spanish language, making it scalable for 100+ languages around the world using the same scene. If we had to do this, say, 3 and a bit years ago, we would have to do 2 separate shoots of this scene in our studio. One for English, one for Spanish. Now, if the actors weren't fluent Spanish speakers, we would have to get new actors. So that's increased content just from a drafting, shoot, and then production perspective that we'd have to leverage. The use of AI technologies and avatars facilitates the global scaling of these programs where appropriate, of course, with reducing all that live shoot time and being able to maximize time efficiencies to focus then on the quality of these outputs thereafter. We then also, and I'll touch on this again a little later, I think one of my summary slides is that translations, we work very closely with TransPerfect, a global partner in translation services, to make sure these are certified, which we all know when it's patient-facing content is heavily important to make sure translations are certified.
I'd also like to find a time to...
Another example of this is not only in actual translations, but in written content as well. I'm going to hit play on this scene, and it's broken into one video, but the first half is a scene where it's presenting a patient for consideration for screening for a program. Both the first half is in English, and then the second half is in French.
Please review Moses' chart and determine if he is eligible to participate in the study. Is Moses eligible? Moses is eligible to participate in this study, as he has no excluding conditions and his lab values are within normal limits. Veuillez examiner le dossier de Moïse et déterminer s'il est éligible pour participer à l'étude. Moïse est-il éligible? Moïse est éligible pour participer à cette étude, car il n'a aucune condition d'exclusion et ses valeurs de laboratoire sont dans les limites normales.
So as you can see, the ability to scale language translation is immense with our platform because of the use of AI as a tool. Now, as I said, if we have, say, a full shoot, a full script that's done in English, And say for a typical protocol modules, that could be 30 to 40 minutes worth of script of written language. Because of AI, we're able to translate that language extremely quickly and in parallel for many languages. Then what happens, obviously, if we get that certified through TransPerfect, we then leverage it to then create and overlay the new content, if it's overlaying on an avatar scenario, to facilitate the scaling of that content, okay? What ends up also happening is if we have ideas about understanding cultural competency, okay? Now, one of the key aspects I touched on before is the Bradatar, an avatar of myself where with my voice, I can speak 100+ languages, okay? But it's probably not appropriate for me as an avatar to speak Spanish to an audience that's targeted in Latin America. We probably want to make sure that the target audience is seeing someone that is representative of them, okay? So with that in mind now, I'm going to hit this video. So this is like a summary video that we utilize of just sort of proficiency services, but there's a key aspect that facilitates the point I'm talking about. Even though it's in the English language, I want you to really listen to the voice that's narrating this, and then the figure that is speaking during this this video.
With Pro-ficiency IMs, you get the best of both worlds. Decades of experience in running flawless professional meetings for the life sciences and state-of-the-art remote and in-person training with Pro-ficiency simulations. The core training on the protocol actually happens before the meeting begins using the Pro-ficiency simulation platform. The Pro-ficiency performance dashboards then inform the study team on investigator gaps in competency and understanding. In this way, the meeting leaders can focus their effort on where it is needed most. This is a more targeted approach than the spray and pray methods of the past. Not all site staff and investigators can come to the IM. In fact, the majority of the people you rely on to implement your protocol over the life of your study did not have the benefit of attending an IM.
So for those that were watching, you saw a generic sort of avatar that was narrating in bits and pieces throughout the footage there. If you were listening clearly, that was an English language spoken with an American accent. For those that maybe really have an attuned ear, that was actually my voice in an American accent and utilized on a generic avatar, okay? So we're able to leverage voices, everything like that into a generic format, a generic avatar that's more representative for the intended audience. And that's what helps with the increased cultural competency. So not only are you potentially going to hear everything in your native tongue so that you really understand it and can engage with it from a learning perspective, you're receiving that message from someone that looks like you. And that's very important, particularly for our global programs.
With Pro-ficiency.
So the overall results, I mean, Pro-ficiency's advantage is, predominantly around reduced site burden. So at a minimum, we're reducing training time on an average by 30%. And that's coupled with the fact that we're mindful of improving investigator meeting times. SIV is more to a remote scenario. But then overall training time after leveraging their reading of a protocol, because we're able to identify the key gaps in their knowledge, a lot of redundancy in training is able to be pushed to the side because the study team, CROs, monitors have the metrics available to know what areas they're to focus on for individuals, for sites, and for the overall study. One of the great advantages of Pro-ficiency is a very engaging, easy to follow platform, as you see by the examples I've shown you today. As a result, we received 97% plus site satisfaction scores. So the learners love our platform because it's not redundant, it's engaging, and they're able to model exactly what they're about to do in a clinical program. And then as a result, you're able to have a hybrid approach when it comes to SRVs and investigator meetings. And maybe many sites move to a hybrid approach, which again is mindful of their time and allows them more time to get up to speed to enroll and get your patients through your program. Our ability to have single sign-on and open API capabilities smooths the tech burden. We don't want to be another post-it note on the side of people's laptops for login details. If there's other platforms that our sponsors need us to integrate and engage with, we're absolutely happy to do that. And it facilitates the flow of information, competency, and all the necessary importance that our training platform requires without being an added tech burden to our customers. Improve study quality. So at a minimum, reducing deviations by a minimum of 20% in critical decision areas. And we're improving enrollment accuracy and not only speed to FBI, but also speed to last patient in. as well, which is getting more and more important these days. You want to reduce the overall enrollment period of these programs. Long-term savings. So on average, we're saving $360K minimum per study. And that comes from a combination of reducing the amount of deviations that are occurring. So overall reporting and all the back and forth and monitoring hours, a lot of that requires. As I said, improved speed to last patient in, so shortening that enrollment period, which obviously ends up being a big cost driver. And monitoring, 6 hours of monitoring saved per site per study, which again is heavily important. You're giving time back to the site. So it's not just a cost saving to our sponsors or CROs that are paying for this. It's a time saving for our sites that enables them to focus more on enrollment and bringing that speed to last patient in closer. And global standardization. Again, I've shown here as an example the AI and avatar and translation capabilities to improve that cultural competency. So it's not just your English-speaking sites that are engaged and learning and confident to execute your program, it's everyone that's involved. And virtual training, again, ensures competency regardless of the location and time at a site team member joins the study. And that's something where and I've got a slide a little later on, touches on many of our capabilities. We are CFR Part 11 compliance systems. So when there's a change, an amendment that happens, a piece of content that's related to that amendment is taken out, adjusted, and when it's plugged back in, that becomes version 2 of the platform. And only those parts can be pushed out to training to people that have already taken version 1. So instead of receiving a whole big module again, they're able to just take that training that is pertinent to the amendment, saving time and money again. And overall results, engaged sites, they enroll. We know that they enroll on time, more frequently and more accurately with less screen failures. And that's an important point, particularly given my previous history leading clinical operations for big programs. Less screen failures means the sites are more confident in understanding the types of patients they got to focus on. And that's a big factor that comes from important training applications like ours. And then we initiate more sites within a shorter time frame. Again, that's that increased confidence in hitting the first patient in, but hitting that last patient in sooner than anticipated. And that's a lot of what we leverage. And as I mentioned, the sites prefer our approach. I've sort of touched on this before. How they prefer our approach. These are some testimonials that have come out. One in particular is very happy for us to identify her, Dr. Diana Phillips Domelici. She's a PI that works a lot in the CNS studies that we've supported. I think she's been involved in 8 or 9 studies. And one of the things I love seeing is just that first line is, as a PI, I've had the privilege of working closely with Pro-ficiency and can say with confidence they have been my gold standard for the onboarding process since I started as a sub-investigator in 2018. I've used their comprehensive training modules across multiple sponsors and CROs since then, and they are by far the most user-friendly. And we'll go on to read from there, but I think you can see that the adaptive learning approach is just because it's so mindful of competency and its engagement and ability to mimic exactly what they're going to do at a clinical site becomes a great part of the PI's tool belt in leveraging what to do for their clinical programs. And as I said, we're at core a learning management system, but have the ability to create all this content to facilitate the management of learning. We adapt to the study. So sites, remember, case study based practice leads to improved application and retention. Deviations reduce and errors are made in the module and not with patients. This process is of high quality for data proactively. We're not fixing errors after they occurred, like we do in clinical research. We're identifying them and fixing them before they even get close to the patients. And amendments are handled seamlessly, so then there's no more redundant training, as I mentioned before. And the system is built for you. As I said, it's Part 11 compliant to ISO, GDPR, ICH Q10, fully functioning LMS, and we touched on before about a single sign-on open API capability. And you are in control as we create the content that you can provide guidance and approval. Our analytics also are used quite a lot to validate CRA performance, as well as the site. Particularly if you're a sponsor that's leveraging CROs, you can make sure that the CRAs assigned to your site are having the same desired competency or learning journey as the sites, hopefully better since they're your site-facing personnel. And again, 24/7 access to real-time compliance and competency reports. When a module is completed by someone on the other side of the world, if you're managing the trial, you can see that live after they're completed. There's no waiting for a push report in a month's time to see what's happened. So overall, we're nearing the end here, and I'm mindful that it's question time. recommendations for AI and avatar use. You're going to have a firm grasp on the content generation production goals you have. Don't let the technology advances divert your attention from these. There can be a lot of shiny things that pull you away from it, and make sure that learner engagement is the overall goal. We want to make sure they can accurately execute your program, but also try and blend the approach, minimize AI's noticeability. And that's why I pointed out the lady narrator that was on earlier, where leveraging our live shoot capabilities and avatar overlay really minimizes the noticeability of AI, particularly for global scaling programs with multiple languages. And as I said earlier, be aware of open source. Is it validated? Is there an audit trail? All that sort of type of thing. And don't waste time on efficiencies gained from the use of AI on low quality, inaccurate representations of your training goals. Make sure that you have great human oversight and final approval of all production and quality assurance, as AI helps with generation, but not certification yet. That's important to know. And when scaling for global programs, we need to make sure you partner with your certified translation organizations to ensure an expedited drafting process, and that it's comparable and has no variance in minimizing errors with certified translations. I want to make sure that anything you're doing for global scaling is still accurate as possible, whilst making the most of the efficiencies gained using AI to globally scale your programs. Thank you all for listening. I hope this was informative, and I really look forward to seeing some of the questions in the chat. So thank you so much. John?
Yep. The first question, Brad, is, can you walk me through a specific example where the Pro-ficiency platform helped reduce protocol amendments or improve site performance in a high-risk study, and how you measured that impact?
Yeah, so one of the best examples I can think about is with one of our clients. They're in the kidney space, and what ended up happening is they have a procedure where they harvest stem cells from the patient, fly them all around to different labs around the world to have them processed in a way that then these autologous stem cells could be injected back into the kidney cortex to help get these renal patients off of dialysis. A very important study, but very costly, both from time and resources, but most of all money for the processing. By the time these stem cells come back to be injected, they're actually worth a few $100,000. The injection goes through the kidney wall, kidney cortex, and for about half the patients, I think, as soon as the needle perforates the kidney wall, the blood pressure would drop idiopathically. Now, because this procedure is done in a cath lab, whenever that happened in general practice, it's code blue. You push the patient into the ER and get their blood pressure back up and make sure they're all okay. But what they found here was that because the procedure takes 45 to 60 seconds, as soon as the needle comes back out of the kidney and out of the patient's body, the blood pressure would go back up. This was told to all the physicians at the investigator meeting. We then leveraged the Pro-ficiency platform to test that exact same scenario in the investigators about an hour or so after they've completed the investigator meeting. Despite them being told in the investigator meeting that you push through 60 seconds, 86% of them got that wrong when they came out of the investigator meeting, which was insane when you think about it, when they just learnt it in the investigator meeting. So we had an opportunity because there was a hold in the study at the time, and then about 6 months later, we're like, well, let's see the stickiness. Let's see how our ability to utilize simulation adaptive learning has held long term. And so 6 months later, we actually developed a new case study where we actually increased the cardiovascular risk factors in this particular patient to make the blood pressure drop even more significant. But the procedure still proceeds, as I mentioned before. Proceed, push through, the blood pressure drop. As soon as the needle comes out, the blood pressure goes back up. This was retested. And then as a result, despite the increased cardiovascular risk factors, it was reversed. 86% of the investigators got it correct first time because they had learnt in the simulated methodology and format earlier that you push through for that 45, 60 second injection. As soon as it comes out, the blood pressure goes back up. So they then followed the protocol instructions, not because of the investigator meeting. It was in spite of the investigator meeting. When you think about it, it's because they had learnt in the simulation methodology in the Pro-ficiency platform thereafter.
Wow, that was pretty impressive. Next question from Will, and Will, let me know if that answered your question. How does the Pro-ficiency behavioral analytics directly feed into your RBQM framework, specifically in identifying risk signals early enough to adjust monitoring strategies before they become deviations or findings?
Yeah, so I mean, the best example of that is sort of that metrics dashboard that I show that better enables the individualization journey, the learning journeys of the roles that are going in there. If you're able to leverage proficiency early enough in the site feasibility process, you can better leverage, firstly, what sites you should proceed with. Two, what sites are best to be a target for first patient in and early enrollment to get the momentum going for your enrollment rate. Which sites need facilitation because maybe they've got a KOL as their PI, so you have to use them. So how do you better plan your risk and resourcing strategy? It's all data-driven and metrics-based, but what you're doing as part of it is, as I mentioned before, you're rearranging not budgets as in adding monies or expenditure because you're adding visits to these riskier sites. You're reassigning that from the sites that you've already identified early on are going to be strong and don't need anywhere near as much oversight as the ones that are struggling. When you have that foresight already driven by these metrics, you can be more aggressive with your resource and budgetary planning for your risk-based monitoring strategy. And overall, that then is going to affect overall RBQM because you're leveraging data and metrics to mitigate the risk for the overall quality and management of the data you're collecting. And that's something that I know a lot of clinical QA people would be happy to leverage if certain sponsors, I guess, were forward thinking enough to be proactive and not only just going with what the site tells you on their feasibility questionnaire, but using metrics of them actually executing your protocol through our platform to then better determine how you have oversight of them in the follow-up for the program and when and how you initiate them.
Awesome. All right, we're going to run a little poll here. And if folks can see this, would you like someone from Simulations Plus to reach out to you? Just a yes or no. And while you're taking that poll, another question for Brad is, have you done any studies or considered using celebrities in some of your avatars to maybe engage people more or see if it works better? It's a real question here.
No, it's a real question I've received previously. Do we have that capability? Absolutely. That's something that could be leveraged. And in fact, it's conversations I've had at conferences, particularly patient advocacy groups. And sometimes some advocacy groups for certain diseases, they may actually have a celebrity that's sort of their champion in the public. So that is definitely something we've been asked. So could we do that? Absolutely. In fact, we've done it not for a celebrity, but I guess it'd be a celebrity depending on what indication you're involved with in clinical research, where we can have, again, where we have a live shot avatar of myself where I can speak 100+ languages. We could do that with, say, the key opinion leader of key opinion leaders for your target indication. And then that key opinion leader could be the person in the module, could be the narrator, could be the doctor treating the patient. And then there can be globally scaled to then speak all the different target languages. So you may have a new PI in Brazil who's just starting their career in clinical research, and yet they're learning in their native tongue by the person that maybe wrote the textbook that they learned everything from. That's a key advantage that we have where, yeah, it's that emotional connection that can happen as part of your learning. And that's important to understand. So yeah, we absolutely have that capability. We just need, I guess, some celebrities to agree to it through whatever groups if they so want to.
Yeah, so we're at the top of the hour. It's very very cool what you guys have done and what you're showing. You actually could, wherever needed, guide clinicians, researchers, whatever, site coordinators through this in almost there's no chance to make a mistake or reduce it 98, 99% if you really want to, right? With adaptive learning, stepwise, simulators, everything, to make this super successful. How are you seeing clients saying, we need to put more in place, we need that feedback, we need that stage gate, step-by-step ability to prevent mistakes?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's I guess an internal battle, particularly in the large pharma organizations, about how early you're able to implement this approach. Because the sooner the better, the sooner you're getting insight, the better you can mitigate it and plan everyone appropriately. Particularly in the biotech space too, actually, because if you've got a protocol, it's in draft mode, and then it finally gets approved by the FDA, all wheels are in motion to get your first patient in as soon as possible. You may not have then thought about, all right, even in the drafting stage, how do we leverage Pro-ficiency's content content generation to better understand the site's risk areas of executing this program. That's something that we're getting involved with more, is in the drafting process. Because we can generate content quickly, we can facilitate that content even on draft protocols to get feedback and better optimize the protocol. That's where the whole protocol optimization using all this comes to the fore, is the quicker we're able to generate content, the quicker you can disseminate that to learners, get feedback to then maybe impact the way you operate that protocol, making it optimized for the sites right after it's been approved by the FDA or EMA, whoever you're submitting it to.
Right. One last question. We're over a couple minutes. Just from a change management perspective, Brad, I've been there, so I'm going to ask this question. The change management in some of these clinical settings is difficult. So I'm wondering, what types of programs do you guys have? Change management programs to try to drive adoption, try to bring people along? Is that part of your repertoire here?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on what you mean by change management, because within, say, a clinical program, obviously the change management process for the typical amendments and things like that, I sort of touched on that in the presentation already. When it comes to sort of a global change management approach, I actually like to leverage what we do from an SSO and API capability about how we gradually change the mindset of how to utilize and how to think about an LMS and what it
culture change.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And we understand that we're working with large pharma organizations that have entrenched learning management systems and a lot of SOPs that relate to the use of that LMS. We don't want to be a barrier and turn that down. What we want to do is facilitate our leveraging into using our content generation capabilities to facilitate that and be as open a book as possible. So gradually over time, they're starting to buy into, firstly, the methodology. Secondly, how they can leverage it to better optimize protocols. And thirdly, and most importantly, how they can make this improve the site's ability to conduct their protocols and then hopefully become the sponsor of choice. As they're gradually buying into that, they're then going to, it's like the tentacles. They gradually filter out to see where else can we apply this knowledge base and methodology throughout the organization. So I think the key factor of that change management is being open and transparent, and we don't want to be a barrier to access.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, great job, Brad. This is an awesome tool. It's totally needed in this space. It's really cool how you guys have done this. Literacy rates have dropped. It's all part of this big picture, and you guys are heading some of this off with your technology, adaptive learning, avatars. It's really cool to see that. So, and it definitely looks like it pays for itself. Well pays for itself. So, great job, and looking forward to seeing more in the future.
Awesome. Thanks, John, and thank you everyone for attending.
Yep. Take care. Thanks, everybody. Stay healthy.